Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The panel is about to start. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We are about to start the panel. Good morning and welcome to the presidential panel of the Prespa Forum Dialogue. My name is Milena and I'm Program Director of European Policy Center, CEB Belgrade, and I'm delighted to be the moderator of this session. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has dramatically changed geopolitics and has brought back the focus on peace and democracy in Europe. Institutes such as Varieties of Democracy and Freedom House have documented the fast derailment of democracy, while scholars have provided evidence of the third wave of autocratization. In the Western Balkan region, various assessments have revealed, with some exceptions, a backsliding and stagnation of democratic processes, making our countries less resilient to malign foreign influences, particularly by Russia and China, and more vulnerable to potential conflicts. Moreover, several analyses and policy papers have also warned that the EU's prioritization of regional stability over democracy has produced an adverse impact on domestic reforms and the transformative power of the EU integration process. A special term, stabilitocracy, has even been coined for this phenomenon of regimes which are maintained to preserve stability, but that are increasingly authoritarian and illiberal. Today's presidential panel aims to delve precisely into these issues. To set the tone for the discussion, we will first hear the keynote address by the President of North Macedonia, Mr. Stevo Pendarovski. Mr. President, you have the floor.
Is it working? It's okay. Just for you to know that the tone of this type of debates is always being set by President Milanovic. It's a very nice environment. Good morning to everybody. I think that it is safe as well. I will try to comment on the points you have mentioned in the food for thought paper distributed to all the panelists, and I will try to be as short as possible and to squeeze everything I have to say within 10 minutes, and please do not be harsh on me if I overstep the time. The very first point you have mentioned, the very first thesis, was that in Ukraine allegedly has changed the geopolitics and has brought back the focus on democracy. I will agree on the first part, but slightly disagree on the second part of this sentence. War certainly brought back focus on geopolitics, but I'm not quite sure at all that it brought back the focus on democracy, at least on the continent. In my view, the Putin's war in Ukraine was mainly instigated by his mode of thinking and his desire to restore the former USSR and that spheres of interests, because in essence this is the war for territory. And certainly not mainline reasoning in his mind when started the war was not kind of a fear because Russia has democracy next door themselves. European Union, in my view, as well, is not looking too much into that dichotomy, as the title of the panel is named, than democracy versus autocracy, or vice versa. And I agree that many scholars, many institutions, many practitioners even, have years back documented the backsliding in certain corners of the continent and in the world towards autocracy, but that has nothing to do directly with the war in Ukraine. You have mentioned Freedom House and we them. They have documented these trends years back. And even the seminal paper mentioned in the paper, Third Wave of Autocratization, was published exactly 3 years before the war in Ukraine started. Maybe it's an interesting trivia to mention that co-author of this seminal work was the current Minister for Europe of Germany, Anna Lurman. Dominance of the geopolitical mode of thinking on the part of the European Union happening beyond doubt in the past 18 to 20 months is a bit worrying from my standpoint. Why? This mode of thinking is quite similar to NATO's mode of thinking. Geopolitical reasoning to be behind the enlargement policy. Why it is a bit worrying for me? Because NATO is predominantly a security organization. European Union is not. The inner structure of the European Union is a bit different from the NATO alliance. And if this is really, I mean the war in Ukraine, if this is really an incentive for entering into the geopolitical mode of thinking and really an incentive to look back to the region and to put more attention for the enlargement process in this region of the Western Balkan, then quite natural questions should follow. What will happen when the war in Ukraine is over? Are we going to be back to the business as usual, which means less attention to the Western Balkan as a region as a whole, not only regarding the enlargement process? And to put it bluntly, in other words, I wouldn't like to see war on the continent to be incentive for anything positive, which should happen. Second thesis, you have asked, is the slow pace of the EU integration process a threat to democracy and peace in the Balkans? Beyond doubt it is. Out of many reasons, I have singled out 3. First, it is confirmed that during negotiations for EU membership, democracy progresses. Democracy is progressing. To put that in other words, without supervision by the EU, backsliding is obvious and in many cases inevitable. Second, after being for so long time in the waiting room of the European Union, as was the case with North Macedonia, people quite naturally are looking for alternatives. And that is translated into the sharp drop in the EU enthusiasm, which is exactly what happened with us. We have recorded the sharpest drop in the EU support or support of our people for our EU membership, exactly 20 to 25 points in the last 20 months. And third, if there are no negotiations, of course, that is opening more space for the so-called malign influences by the third actors or the so-called extra-regional powers. Why? Because the country, to put that short, country being in such a situation is not part of the common information sharing, and even more, it is not part formally of the crisis management mechanisms. The third point you have mentioned in the paper, what the Euro-Atlantic community should do to support democracy in the Balkans. Now, to be open at the very beginning, we are very, very supportive of the US-led Summit for Democracies and participating since the very beginning. We appreciate very much the Team Europe Democracy Initiative being launched 3 years ago, which includes Western Balkan region as well. But in my humble view, one-time events cannot sustain democracy. They can serve only as the lateral push and certainly cannot serve as or be the core of mutual efforts to democratize. What do we need is to see systemic and irreversible progress in place. And for that, we do need a framework with at least 5 components: legal, political, and economic, plus security and intelligence on a lesser scale. The first 3 components are best served by the European Union. The last 2, certainly, for the last 2, the first call should be the NATO alliance. Next point mentioned in the food for thought paper. How can we ensure that technology, especially AI and social media, will promote democracy? I'm afraid to say that something like that has never happened in the history of humankind. And just take the latest example of television development. It is true that through the development of television a century back, which started a century back, we have many more people being better informed and able to make informed decisions. But everybody is aware that even today, not to speak about decades ago, television has been ideal mean to manipulate with the minds and hearts of the people. And we have seen a lot of examples when en masse, in some instances, some cases, television have been the instrument in the hands of known or notorious autocrats. Modern technologies offer much more bigger room for manipulation with the people. Of course, they're offering much more bigger room for informing the people much quicker and using the diversified sources of info. So what should be done quickly, because it will ask for a separate debate or separate conference even more? In my view, states and the international organizations should start as soon as possible regulating a bit more this area, this field. First of all, through licensing of the subjects being present on the social media, then asking for the recognizable editorial boards, and finally, certainly not the least important, to ask for the individual responsibility for the individuals who are putting content on the social media platforms, including the individual websites. Everybody knows that regarding the AI, we are already in the uncharted waters. I think that one example will suffice to explain the daunting task ahead of us. I would like to cite one of the modern guru of the AI, the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, who recently, during the hearing in the US Congress, said, I quote, "Regulatory intervention by governments will be critical to mitigate the risks of increasingly powerful models." If Altman is saying this, then it is really very challenging task ahead of us. In my humble opinion, we should be fast, very fast, much faster than up to now, and well organized, because it's notorious that autocrats are much better than democrats in using or misusing the social platforms or internet sites. No doubt that the same will happen, or maybe is already happening with the AI. But in this regard, I think we should commend the recent initiative of the United Kingdom for hosting the first major global summit on AI safety, where key countries and leading tech companies and known researchers should evaluate the most significant risks coming from the AI and, of course, propose, if possible, set of safety measures. Along the same line should be the UK initiative as well, in July this year to convene the first ever briefing to the UN Security Council on the opportunities and risks of the AI for international peace and security. Finally, very briefly, I think I'm still within the 10 minutes. How can we ensure that individuals, particularly youth and women, should effectively participate in the decision-making process? It will ask for a series of international conferences and panels, but very quickly, and we'll citing one local experience we do have from our recent past. It's very difficult to put women and young people into the decision-making processes, especially in this region, because our societies have been dominated for centuries by male adults. And I can see really no other way for higher and better inclusion of women and youth population in the decision-making process but through the so-called affirmative action. And short example in this regard, in 2002 we have introduced a provision in our electoral code asking for 30% at least of female candidates for the members of the parliament. Since that time, so in the past 20-21 year, we have recorded in each parliamentary elections at least 40% of females to be in our parliament. And of course we have made a mistake regarding the same law, and speaking about the same year, we haven't put the provisions on this about the participation of females in the mayoral race. And this is the end result. Today, out of 80 municipalities in North Macedonia, we have, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, only 2 female mayors. Thank you.
Thank you, President Pendarovski, for covering the whole area of this panel, and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing our other panelists' opinions on these pertinent questions. But before I give the floor to the presidents who are present here with us, we will first hear a video message from Mr. Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I am honored to join you all today. I'm only sorry I cannot be with you in person, especially as you meet on the beautiful shores of Lake Ohrid. In 2020, I was deeply proud to be the NATO Secretary General that saw North Macedonia take its place as the 30th member of the NATO alliance. This was only possible thanks to the Prespa Agreement, the 5th anniversary of which we celebrate in just 2 days' time. It was the result of years of perseverance and determination from both sides, as well as a strong commitment to reform. The Prespa Agreement made NATO accession possible. It has also contributed to good neighborly relations and a brighter future for North Macedonia. North Macedonia is a valued ally. It contributes to our peacekeeping mission in Kosovo, a role that is vital for the security of the Western Balkans, especially at a time of heightened tensions. In the past few days, we have bolstered our KFOR mission with hundreds of extra troops in a clear demonstration of NATO's commitment to the region. North Macedonia has increased defense spending, and it is supporting our partner Ukraine in its time of greatest need, including with a commitment to send attack helicopters. NATO can count on North Macedonia, just as you can count on NATO. The clearest example is the NATO jets that patrol your skies as part of our air policing. This is NATO action and solidarity in action. Good for North Macedonia, good for the Western Balkans, and good for the Euro-Atlantic security. Agreements like Prespa are an important part of the rules-based international order, ensuring our freedom, our prosperity, and our future. The alternative is disaster, as we see in Ukraine. Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine has shattered peace in Europe and fundamentally changed our shared security. Whenever the war ends, our relationship with Moscow has changed fundamentally. The security landscape in Europe will never be the same. President Putin wants a different Europe. He sees freedom and democracy as a threat. We also see how China and Russia are drawing closer together. China is not our adversary, but it is challenging our security, our interests, and our values. As authoritarian regimes increase their cooperation, it is even more important that all those who believe in freedom and democracy stand together to promote peace, protect our shared security, and defend the global rules. We demonstrate this most clearly through institutions like NATO and the European Union. This event asks whether we will have a widened European family by 2030. Whether that is mission impossible or mission possible. The answer is that it is more than possible. It is actually happening. Following in North Macedonia's footsteps, Finland has now joined the alliance. This is a direct response to Russia's war aggression against a neighbor. And I'm working hard to ensure that Sweden's accession is completed as soon as possible. Ukraine also belongs in the Euro-Atlantic family. All allies have agreed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. And that decision will be for Ukraine and NATO allies alone. Russia does not have a veto. The world is at crossroads. In one direction lies fear, oppression, and war. But in the other, there's hope, democracy, and peace. And that is the path that NATO will always choose. Thank you again, and I wish you all the very best for the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Okay, now that we've heard from Mr. Stoltenberg, we can start our panel, and we will first hear the introductory remarks from each of the panelists. I would kindly like to ask you to stay between 5 to 7 minutes if possible. After that, I will each ask you to reflect on one of the specific questions that we were provided in the Food for Thought document. And after that, we will hopefully get some questions from the audience. I hope that the answers will be crisp and short, and as well as questions which should be short and crisp rather than making long comments. We will first start with Mr. Zoran Milanovic, President of Croatia. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Milena. Hello, everybody. First, I think I should reflect on the I read them as a kind words of my friend Stevo Pendarovski, that I'm what do you say, dissenter, or that I'm tone setter? Oh, sometimes dissenter, but I have no ambition to set a tone of this discussion. I'll stick to the time. So first, I will kick off with the Cato the Older's famous saying about Carthage, applied on the case of the Western Balkans countries. Ceterum censeo Carthaginem delendam esse. Furthermore, I think the Carthage should be destroyed. So furthermore, I think that the Western Balkans countries, those who still remain unabsorbed, should be absorbed within the EU. It's been overdue. It's a humiliatingly long process, the one for which nobody reasonable, nobody well-intended can provide a meager explanation. Take Albania, for instance. Huh? They've been with NATO, that sublime, overarching, towering protector of peace and democracy for what, 14 years now? You've been NATO member for 14 years. And when I'm uttering these words, I'm replicating myself from the 10, 11 years ago. These are the words that I was telling to the audience in 2012. So, provided Albania can be admitted to NATO, keep all the secrets of the organization to her chest, participate in the common creation of the security of the organization that stands there, to keep Russians out, Germans. No, that's not in mode anymore. So, but we are protectors of democracy. So how come that country failed so miserably and failed to meet the criteria over such a long time? Or maybe it isn't the country, the Albania herself, that failed, but you know, the obnoxiously hard and unpredictable process that we have imposed onto her. So, ceterum censeo, mark my words. To stick to the timeline, before we start lecturing the others about, and the others, it's erga omnes, it's towards everybody, urbi et orbi, about human rights, values, and other stuff, we should stop for a moment, reflect back, and think about ourselves and the level of democracy that resides with EU, for instance, European Union, a beautiful integration of which my country has been a member for full 10 years. One of these days is going to be an anniversary. And actually, I was the privileged one to address the audience, the Croatian citizens, at the main square on the occasion of the entry, on the very eve of the entry. So it's been 10 years with us. And in a nutshell, you know that sitcom by Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm? So don't be over-enthusiastic. It's not bad, though. Back then, I would root for the same cause. It's good. But is it really democratic? Is that the launch ramp from which we can launch a rocket that will burst into the sky and send the message of democracy? Well, the very institutions of the EU are, well, hardly democratic, to say the least. European Parliament is not a democratic institution. It doesn't play by the standards of national parliaments. European Commission is not a democratic institution. It lacks from the chronic, suffers from the chronic lack of responsibility. Well, it's not a right word. Of accountability, and that's the fact. The very phrase chosen for the denomination of the highest ranked commissar sends the chill down my spine and smacks of some long past times. Something on a personal note, something that I have to repeat, not to be wrongly or incorrectly associated, because there were some attempts lately. I was leader of the very liberal, and leader for a full decade, a very liberal Social Democratic Party. We were champions of human rights. Actually, we were human rights peddlers. We peddled across the board to everybody, We were signaling virtues, the phrase these days. We were convincing everybody that, this is the prescription for you to become a better man or a woman as of next Monday. Just follow the script. You're going to be better. I very often felt like a priest. And I think we did a good thing, LGBT rights in my country, just name it. 10 years ago, we were ahead of Germany on the index. Minority rights, all elements, all colors of the spectrum were there. I'm not in that business anymore. I'm a president of the Democratic Republic, aware of all her fallbacks and shortages, aware that I'm living, and we are all living in an imperfect environment. I never displayed any interest in Russians, actually. All the contacts that I have with Putin's people were on the German initiative of Angela Merkel in the last decade. Deal with them, do this, do that, I granted Croatian passport to at least a couple of Putin's opponents, a nemesis like Garry Kasparov, a famous chess player, champion, because I liked him and he indebted Croatia, and I didn't like Putin that much back then. Some of the people who follow the script these days actually did. So Putin is not, and Russia is not of my interest. It is us. It is the standards that we set. It is accountability of the European Union. It is the accountability of those who are in permanent business of peddling values. It is about my issues whenever I address the crowd of the curious youngsters to explain how come there is still that penalty in the US. Actually, they do not exercise that penalty very much, but it is still a towering infernal threat that you're going to be killed for the transgression against the society. Not in all the states. What about the electoral process? Am I supposed to teach Albanians about, or Montenegrins for that matter, about otherwise impeccably correct electoral process of theirs, whereas we don't see stains on our face, and we are not able to blow the grit at our doorstep? What about American electoral process? What about the urge, you know, to extend the franchise? I'm not talking about US here exclusively, because that hampers the credibility and trust in the electoral process. I don't want to see that in my backyard. And I will always sacrifice that chimera of absolute turnout for the benefit of lower turnout, but predictability and the control of the process, because the electoral process has to be controlled. That removed, all hell breaks loose. And then we come and start with name calling, finger pointing, you stole this, you stole that. This is happening with us. And the final note about NATO, you know, I've been, well, friend or acquaintance with Stoltenberg for years. We biked together in Dubrovnik in the months after he was first elected Secretary General. I was still a Prime Minister. And we are both liberal. He's Norwegian, though I'm from the south of Central Europe. And when we talk about accountability in NATO, well, I'm the President and the Supreme Commander of the Croatian Armed Forces, no matter how tiny and meager that they may be. Well, by the way, we just bought, you know, 12 French fighters, so beware enemies. But we're small. Yeah? We're small, we have limited capabilities. But all these, you know, prognosis and all these assessments of the situation in Ukraine that I keep on hearing from the most prominent science of NATO, that is US, UK, NATO Secretariat, which is just a secretariat. He's just a Secretary General. He's not a president, he's not a king. He's a nice guy, though. That's something that has not been adjusted among us. Time and again, I hear that for the first time from him or some other high dignitaries of the European Union, commissars and stuff. And those people, unlike 10 years ago, in the current crisis, are talking and pointing at the difference between life and death, freedom and serfdom. So these are huge issues. And on whose behalf, and as a result of which process they address us. And that is incremental deficiency of the EU, lack of accountability. And final note, it all stems from, of course, from the inherent ambition or tendency of bureaucracy to procreate or further self-create, but also from the idea to introduce years ago a common currency. And the common currency is the state, something Mitterrand and the others were fully aware of. But they were in the business of buying the time. So it's going to be settled along the road, but it hasn't. Because current currency means common debt and issuance of the common debt. The other does not exist without the former, and the other way around. That's something Alexander Hamilton of the US was very aware of in the very first days. That's what makes America viable and possible, if you will. Without that, Europe will not be something that many wish, but something that I do not wish myself, and that is federal state. And that is federal state. With the power totally removed from the province, from the periphery, from the capillary elements of the EU, and centered into the Brussels. But that is another, you know, it's not a food for thought, it's a stockpile for thought. It's a big looming issue of our era. So let's forget about Russia for a moment, if possible, because that's not our world. I never socialized, I never mingled, I never cared. I was in business of doing the best for my country and the neighbors. So as being in a Roman Senate, ceterum censeo, they should be admitted because they are not any worse than us. Huh?
Thank you very much, President Milanovic, for a very candid address and for stressing the importance of accountability, but also the importance of not lecturing others about values, but also looking ourselves in the eye.
It's the business of peddling, huh?
We will now proceed with Mr. Bayram Begay, President of Albania. Mr. Begay, the floor is yours.
There were President Penarovsky, Distinguished President Pendarovsky, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to participate in this panel, this exceptionally important platform for peace, security, and prosperity. It is truly a pleasure, but also a responsibility, because this forum comes at a very delicate but exceptionally important moment for the Euro-Atlantic area. This forum reminds us of the historic Prespa agreement, shows us how visionary, brave leaders undertake and should take responsibility. This agreement expanded the Euro-Atlantic area of security. Going back to today's topic for debate of this panel, between peace and democracy on one side and the war and autocracy on the other side, and starting from the Albanian experience in the time of communism, my country within 50 years had peace but had no democracy. Peace is almost guaranteed when women can enjoy their democratic rights and are part of it. Of democracy. After the Cold War, there was the general optimism that war is no longer an option, and democracy won and increased its scope throughout the world. But only all of us became witnesses of brutal, unprovoked war aggression from one of the members of the Council of Security of the UN towards or on another country that is a member state of the UN. And we have different effects, from nuclear threat to security, food security, to increasing of prices of energy, global insecurity, increasing of everything, and this increases the insecurity, the feeling of insecurity for the future. This has a direct influence on our region, Western Balkans, where we're still trying to build a region where a climate of cooperation and security will rule. At the beginning of my address, I mentioned the Prespa agreement, and still we have the images in our head of the agreement that ended the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the Kumanov agreement as well that stopped the Kosovo genocide. Also the Ohrid Framework Agreement that gave birth to a very quality spirit of cooperation and joint life of Macedonians and Albanians. And in the end, the agreement between Kosovo and Serbia was another ray of hope and optimism, but unfortunately, it quickly showed that there is a certain disappointment here, and I do not want to get into too much details here because our partners contribute towards mutual recognition, normalization of relations between the countries, but no one can bring into question territorial sovereignty and integrity of Kosovo, and Kosovo is a political reality that is irreversible, but I feel that it's the right time for the leaders of this country to take up the historical responsibility like those in North Macedonia and Greece to push forward the reconciliation process and normalizing of relations and mutual recognition. We have created a lot of regional initiatives with this purpose, but it seems that we're still not where we want to be. A peaceful region, a safe region, and a developed region. Albania is dedicated to its mission as a factor of stability in the region and in the Western Balkans. It is an exporter of security as a member of the NATO, but also as a not full member of the Security Council of the United Nations, and it wants to contribute for the aggressor in Ukraine not to win. In the past years, we have tried to build and consolidate Albania functional and democratic institutions with the support of our partners, the USA and the EU. This tendency I can see in the other countries in the region, and generally the region is going through a new momentum and a different dynamics. Half of the countries in the Western Balkans are active members of the NATO, and all countries have had progress in their integration to the EU. For the first time, the EU organized a summit with the leaders of the region outside of its territories, and this was in Tirana. For the first time, one of the countries in the region, Albania, is a chair of the Berlin process. All of these development, but also the economic and territorial cooperation between the Western Balkans countries are very encouraging. We're facing challenges that require engagement, nationally speaking, regionally speaking, and internationally speaking. All of us need to unite to find solutions and to create change. There is a certain element that puts democracy and stability in front of this general spirit, and this is the weakness of democratic systems in many countries. They're more significant today than ever. The values of democratic rule and the expansion of our investments in the Euro-Atlantic relations. But unfortunately, we have to say that in the past year, due to the geopolitical events and the increase of the power of third-party, non-democratic entities, the dilemma arises: democracy or stability. We have learned that democracy is not irreversible. It depends on many variables, known or unknown, that we need to keep in mind, and tolerating them, or even worse, not acting immediately and not acting in a coordinated manner, makes us go from a democracy to autocracy. And it's just a matter of time when this would happen. In this era of traditional values and challenges, challenges become more complex, and it is more important than ever now to promote the values of democratic rule. Together in this forum, we must point out and transfer the message that doesn't matter what political issues we're going through, the future of this region is in Europe and in the Euro-Atlantic family. Those that used to be in conflict or those that promote conflict should not be successful, and we should contribute to this because we're a small region where cultures and traditions are intertwined. The Balkans has excellent opportunities to create positive energy, particularly in the more intense communication, economically speaking. The Balkans have a lot to offer and have expanded their hand of friendship towards their toward their neighbors and allies. I believe that our conflicts can turn into lessons of our past. I would like to thank the President Pendarovski and the government of North Macedonia for the opportunity they gave me to address everyone in this beautiful town next to the Ohrid Lake, there where ethnic harmony is a model that needs to be followed through. Thank you.
President Begay, I take from your intervention the stress you put on the importance of actually it being the high time for responsible decisions by the leaders of the region, especially the leaders of Serbia and Kosovo. We will now proceed with President of Montenegro, Mr. Jakub Milatovic. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's my great honor also to speak today at the Prespa Forum, and I would like to elaborate on one hypothesis, which is the following, that the democratic and prosperous Western Balkans is only possible on a sustainable manner if the region becomes fully the part of the European Union. There are three things that I would like to make as part of that hypothesis. I think that the first one is basically the ability of the region to resolve the issues on our own. And I think that the Prespa agreement was an example of that thing. I think that back in 2018, there was a brave decision by North Macedonia and Greece that enabled resolution of a long-lasting problem between the two countries, and it indeed showed the ability of the countries of the region to sort out the problems on our own. However, what I think it didn't really come as a reward was a further progress, particularly when it comes to the Northern Macedonia and its EU accession. The second thing that I would like to mention is that perhaps one positive thing within the Ukrainian tragedy, which followed what is now the Russian aggression on the Ukrainian territory, is a woke-up call in Brussels, a woke-up call in which the institutions of the European Union started observing the process, the accession process, in a more political way, rather than in a just technical way, as it was the case over the last few years. This is why Kosovo got a visa liberalization, Bosnia got a candidacy status, Albania and Northern Macedonia started negotiations. And this is how it should be from now on. I think that a successful completion of the process in which the Western Balkans will become fully the member of the EU cannot be completed without the two sides of the process. One being the technical and the other one naturally being political. And the third part of my elaboration is what can Montenegro do to basically accelerate the process. I truly believe that now, with all the changes that happened in Montenegro over the last 2 or 3 years, Montenegro can be this successful story of the EU accession, which can happen by 2025, 2026, and the accession story of Montenegro can be much greater than Montenegro. It can be a good example for the rest of the region of the Western Balkans, as well as a good example for the eastern countries of Europe, that the enlargement process is something which is alive and not only something which exists in high-level discussions. And I think that this is why I have entered Montenegrin politics, to bring Montenegro into the EU and really to present Montenegro in this positive story, also an example to the rest of the Western Balkans. So, with those three things, I do believe that the future of the region is in the EU, and I do believe that now it's the momentum that should and that will be seized for this to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Milatovic, and I think we are definitely in desperate need of a good and positive story here in the region, so we're all hoping for the best for Montenegrin path to the EU. Now, last but certainly not the least, the only lady on this panel, because moderators are normally not counted towards the gender balance in panels. It is my pleasure to give the floor to Zoran Antovska, the youth representative on the panel.
Thank you. First, dear guest, I'm honored and delighted to be sharing this podium with all of you. Discussing youth and democracy in the Western Balkans is a significant responsibility during this transitional period. As a young person myself, I would like to address both sides of the story. On one hand, the Balkans have a history of autocratic rule and military tensions. Living in societies characterized by violence and repressions leaves lasting scars and traumas which can influence the values and perspectives of young people. It seems that many young individuals who grew up under autocratic regimes tend to believe in myths surrounding strong-handed rulers and the idea of a savior. After 30 years of transition and experiencing poor conditions for work and personal growth, we find ourselves unconsciously embracing the myth of a powerful state. However, I think that it's equally incorrect to assume that Western partners will solve all the internal bilateral problems of the Balkans. While all countries in the regions aspire to be part of the European family, it's crucial to acknowledge that regional stability is a prerequisite for European stability. To achieve this stability, we need consistent application of shared values and the elimination of double standards, both within and outside of the European Union. The slow pace of integration poses a problem as it reinforces Euroscepticism among young people rather than being a positive factor. But on the other side of the story, we, the young people, are also disappointed from ourselves as a nation. Corruption, institutional defenses, and nepotism are prevalent issues, and yet we often remain apolitical when it comes to fighting against them. The greatest threat to our country, as well as to all Western Balkan countries, is brain drain and migration. If young people continue to leave the region, we will face a shortage of individuals who can champion democratic values and also lead state institutions with a democratic European spirit. Only by actively involving young people in shaping the future of their countries, it's possible to create a more positive and inclusive environment that can counter Eurosceptic tendencies. I know that no actor in international relations is flawless, which is why we must all strive for self-improvement. We need to eliminate double standards and avoid applying different rules for young and old, women and men, rich and poor, and countries within and outside of the European Union. Therefore, we should focus on living together and engaging in meaningful dialogue with those who are different from us, rather than merely coexisting and practicing tolerance. Let us work towards enhancing the social capital index, which signifies increased trust between people. And when we talk about trust between people, we mean all of us, representing all countries within the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zorana. I will now ask each panelist a short question. I would like to ask you for short answers so that we have time for a couple of questions also from the audience. And I will start with you, Mr. Pendarovski. The European Union, to which we are all aspiring, was founded by visionary statesmen, the founding fathers of the EU, who were capable of setting their historical differences, very deep historical differences aside, and working in the interest of their people and of durable peace. North Macedonia is certainly one of the good examples in the region of such capability, but on the other hand, it seems that in some parts of the region, this still comes very, very difficultly. It is still very difficult to set aside the past and to look into the future. What is your 2 cents on why it is so difficult for the region to look into the future, to really care about the future generations and their prosperity, and to, let's say, set aside, if not forget, the historical disputes and differences?
It should be a long answer. You have asked for short answers, and let's try to make that as short as possible. It will ask for different and separate sessions and panels and conferences to explain, in my view, the historical roots for this kind of behavior on the part of the Balkan people. In short, at least in my view, and I would like to hear additional and other opinions as well. Historical legacy in the region, I'm not speaking about the latest series of the wars from the 1990s after the dissolution of Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, but history going back centuries has not produced a conducive environment of building up democracy. To put that in other words, Macedonia has never been, and few, not all, of the former Yugoslav republics, we have never been living in democracy. We have started building up formal democratic system in 1991. And whenever people are asking me what's the difference between, for example, the UK and Macedonia, always saying the difference is very small. We have plural parliament established in 1991. They have established plural parliament in the 13th century. So democracy asks for democratic culture, for political culture, and it's taking generations and generations to build up. I think we are, as late beginners and late starters in that democratic processes, are quite good. I'm speaking for the region as a whole because, as I said, Yugoslavia was not a democratic entity, and we have been in a one-party system, being softer than other socialism, so-called socialism around us, but still there was not a pluralism in political and economic terms, which are the fundamentals for building up the sound democratic system and resilience to, coming back to the title of the session, and to building up resilience towards autocratic tendencies. Unfortunately, we are seeing as that building up in the region in the past few years. So it takes time. It takes time, as simple as that. And probably new generations and amended educational systems to taught the people to the real democratic values. Unless we embed it in our minds, democratic values, we can, can you imagine that in you are quite young, you are not imagining that time, you're not remembering that times. In 1991 and the period later, we have started for the first time teaching our people about the basic concepts of democracy, speaking about the rule of law. We do not have the concept of the rule of law, concept of human rights and freedoms at all in former Yugoslavia. So we have started really from the scratch.
Thank you, President Pendarovski. And I'm not that young, so I was walking for democracy in 1990s in Serbia, and we are walking again for democracy in Serbia. I will now proceed with President Milanovic. I would like to ask you about the EU's approach to supporting democracy in the accession process. We know that there is this general approach of more for more, less for less, but somehow we haven't seen really that side of the less for less working, and democratic backsliding in the region has not really been followed by any sort of backsliding or withdrawal in the accession process. The EU has also defined its approach, fundamentals first, putting democracy and rule of law as the basic foundations of the negotiation process in the countries. But again, it seems that somehow it is not managing to truly transform its candidates into working, functional democracies, and some of the countries of the region are actually looking less and less like, or appearing less and less like real candidates for EU membership. So what do you think would be the right approach of the EU? How should the EU better support the development of democracy and strengthening of democratic standards in the accession process?
Well, maybe for starters, to quit labeling some developments as democratic backsliding, because it's been, the self-reiterating phrase. Whatever happened in the region, I cannot see that, as a democratic backsliding. In terms of what? Can we speak of democratic backsliding in Montenegro? Well, they just got themselves the new president, who stepped in the shoes of a guy who ruled for 30 years democratically. And he's another one, or in Albania, or in Northern Macedonia, or in Serbia for that matter. It's not backsliding. I mean, Vučić is not the best friends of mine, nemesis either, not particularly big foe. We have certain disagreements and misunderstandings, but that guy was democratically elected. And Serbian parliament for that matter. The practices and the morals and attitudes of the society, that's something that is much bigger than life. It's superimposing. And well, it's not a message to you, of course, Milan. I mean, I think you're doing very decent, actually excellent job. But we should refrain, for some phraseology. Like when I hear, that's my favorite one, Euroscepticism. So you're being what? You're not talking in accordance with the creed of the faith. So you're being skeptical towards Europe. What's wrong about that? I mean, being skeptical. Is that not a way that you should want your kids to be raised? To be skeptical, albeit faithful, loyal, reasonable, but skeptical, along the lines of Ronald Reagan. Trust but verify, or Gorbachev. Доверяй, но проверяй. So trust but verify. Yes, one should be skeptical about everything in life. And for the most part about new, grandiose creations of our era, which are supposed to change everything. Yes, that's for the better of your society, of your country. And, but there is always that, I don't know if the audience is aware of the term porcupine. It's a kind of animal with a long spears. It's like a hedgehog on the steroids, big spears. So the porcupine dilemma, according to Arthur Schopenhauer, is the inherent, trouble of every interhuman relationship. The closer you get to each other, the spears start sticking. So inherently, it's supposed to harm both. So the closer we get to each other, being two human beings, in particular female and a male, or two entities, it's encumbered with unpredictable hardships. And the same goes for the EU. The closer we get together, the more troubles are supposed to happen. So be skeptical, yes, but we have faith, have reason. Ain't that something that the Enlightenment movement was teaching us? Being reasonable, being trustful. That's something that for the most part, you know, was the umbrella of my political career. And I was skeptical about the EU. So thus, in 2014, as a sitting prime minister, I was supposed to become a commissioner, Tavarish Commissar, so commissioner of the European Commission, vice president, in all likelihood. But I was skeptical, so I preferred staying calm in my country and doing things from Zagreb, because I suspected and I was cautious about that issue of lack of the democratic accountability, because that's how I viewed the concept. I didn't want to detach myself all that much, because I was always preaching values, you know, that many women, gender quota, kid quota, or youngsters quota, LGBT, you know, we should push forward, and we did. But at one point, you have to stop a bit, reflect, and be skeptical. So, what makes Montenegro less democratic than Hungary? Or the other way around? What? I mean, I was at odds with Orban many times, in particular during the migrant crisis of magnitude of 2015. I was pro-migration, you know, opening borders in that very moment, not in perpetuity, because the borders should be respected. There are three elements of state: people, territory, and democratic, or for that matter, any kind of state power. So borders, they exist. But what makes Hungary autocratic? I mean, that guy's been in a position for 16 years, and now in power in aggregate for 17 years. That he's not, to the best of my taste, is one thing, but to label him and the whole nation, which is, by the way, a neighboring nation of mine, as an authoritarian, you know, as some simpletons who keep on electing authoritarian leader, well, that's an affront at best. You don't talk that way among civilized people. So that's something, the older I get, the more trouble I have with that, you know, and I still embed it in my core values. And that's open society, that's, damn it, Karl Popper, you know? And you know whom he labeled and thought of as the greatest enemies of democracy: Plato, Marx, and Hegel. I fully subscribe.
Thank you, President Milanovic. I fully subscribe to your message that skepticism is good and healthy, but that allows me also to be skeptical about the other part of your response about the not backsliding, the fact that there isn't backsliding in the region, but that is just my personal opinion. I would like now to give the word to ask a question to President Milatovic. You mentioned the importance of seizing the momentum, that the EU has to also seize the momentum in the region now. So what would be your one or two key recommendations? What should the EU do now in order to truly seize the momentum in the region and promote EU integration and EU accession?
I can give you one best thing that the EU can do now.
Perfect.
Which is to absorb Montenegro into the EU.
Does Montenegro fulfill all the criteria?
To seize the momentum. I think, you know, that's sort of a full in line to what I just said. I think that there is a great momentum geopolitically as well. I think that Brussels understood that the process should become a bit more political. And I think that, you know, now the momentum is to be seized. And I think that Montenegro, to that regard, is a front runner. It's a country which has already been Eurized. It's a country without any issues with the neighbors. It's a country that has already been negotiating for 10 years. It's a country which is already a member of NATO. It's a country that changed the government in a relatively democratic manner. It's a country, you know, with a great president. So I think, you know, and the prime minister, and the next prime minister as well. So I think, you know, that's the answer, you know, to be given. And I think, you know, that's what's needed for the people of North Macedonia. That's what's needed, you know, for the people in the other countries of the region. Because, you know, otherwise, the accession only exists in the high-level discussions at the summits. And then everything becomes very technical. So that's the answer.
Thank you very much, President Milatovic. I will now turn to President Begay. You mentioned, you spoke about the importance of visionary decisions and forward-looking, future-oriented decisions by statesmen in the region. I would like to ask you, how can the neighbors in the region, such as Albania, help support more visionary decisions by statesmen and women in the countries which are in disputes or conflicts with each other, in the interests of peace and prosperity? How important would it be for the neighbors, again, such as Albania, to really be unbiased and set aside their own interests in the management of these regional disputes? Can the neighbors in the region be also contributors to the facilitation of peace and democracy in the region?
Thank you. I think that nowadays we are living in unprecedented time, and we need to have a clear vision and clear wisdom about the situation. Albania is a country that, from 1990, is a country that is dreaming to join the EU. As President Jakov said, that we don't have any issue open with our neighbors. But we know that there are some issues open in our Albanian community in northern part of Kosovo. But when I said that it's time for leaders to behave not as a politician, but as a statesman, to think more about for future, not for the past, it means that they have to get a very tough decision, but a good decision that will be good for our children, will be good for prosperity of our nations, of our regions, and not needed to spend so much energy from international community for something that is nothing. So instead of using and looking after the positive things, after the negative things, I think that it's better to think about positive stuff and to think about the prosperity of the region.
Thank you, President Begay. And Zorana, one question for you. How can young people be more involved in the policy and decision-making processes? Future is something that affects young people the most, yet they're usually not involved in the most important decisions affecting their future. They're somehow rather the consumers of those decisions, even when they're present. So how can the young people really be involved in order to increase the quality of our democracies and ensure prosperity and peace in our societies?
Thank you for your question. Well, I think that young people are usually part of the discussion, but not really have a chance to change anything. So often these times when the discussion are being made for the young people, we are witnessing a situation where there are no young people and they are not really involved in the process. So the first problem here I would like to address is that maybe that the most important thing is better inclusive education, which will motivate more young people to be louder for the most important issues that bothers them. So in the very end, I would like to address that all of us should teach young people to be critical, but also to be example that we want to see in the society.
Thank you very much, Zorana, for this message. I will now open the floor. We have 14 more minutes. I would like to take a few questions from the audience. Please please just present yourself and pose a short question. I would like us to avoid long comments, and please state who you're addressing your question to. And I'm sure that there will be somebody who will break the ice. Over there, I think it's our colleague journalist from Bulgaria, please. And thank you for breaking the ice.
So someone has to do it, right? So hello everyone, thank you for your interesting thoughts. My name is Angel Petrov. I work for a Bulgarian news website. It's called Dnevnik. Most of you will understand me because you have the same word in your languages, except for Mr. Begay. So it means daily newspaper. So anyway, I have two questions which will be short, but inspired from what Mr. Milanovic labeled like healthy skepticism, if I may. So I'm curious about your degree of skepticism towards two things that are related to our common European future. One is this idea that we've also discussed yesterday about staged integration into the EU, drop by drop, part by part, joining some parts of some structures of the EU and some decision-making of the EU, but left out of other ones. Do you have any reserves? Do you hold any skepticism towards that as not being full members if you follow this path? Of course, this question is mostly directed to the non-EU members, but if Mr. Milanovic wants to have his say, I would be curious. And secondly, the Open Balkan project, because we've heard much criticism that the energy that aspiring EU members can waste toward this project that some of you are actually in will actually alienate the candidates or aspiring countries from the EU direction. So do you think there should be a red line in cooperation within the Open Balkan? Do you think there is a point where it can turn into an alternative to the EU and just lead to countries synchronizing their standards in between themselves instead of looking toward the EU? Because after all, the EU is a game of standards too.
Thank you. And as a moderator and also as one of the authors of the staged accession proposal, I think that you have slightly misunderstood the proposal, so I'm really looking forward to discussing it with you after this session. But without further ado, I would like to give the floor now to the panelists. Whoever would like to pick up on either of these two questions, please go ahead. President Milanovic, will you go first?
You said that the first question relates relates both to member state and non-members, if not more so to the latter. But non-members, they do not participate at all. They should lasciate ogni speranza, leave any hopes in that, for the time being, of course, and hopefully to be changed. Now, did I get you right that you wanted to know, for me to elaborate a bit more about the deficiencies of the accountability and the decision-making process? Is that what you had in mind? Is that what you had in mind?
Full membership. No, sorry.
No, there is no alternative.
The alternatives to full membership that have been discussed at different stages.
Okay, that's a whole new ballgame, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. There are no, this is an alternative, you know? And this is sham. This is...
Microphone?
This is dysfunctional.
Microphone, please.
Whoa.
Okay, that woke us up.
The wall will fall down again.
Well,
If anybody was sleeping, no, they're not.
So, I think that...
It's not working down here.
yeah.
No, this is...
There's the mobile microphone.
Start to make
the mobile mic.
observances, huh?
Mobile mic.
Always have.
Voila. No alternative to that process. Or it should be dropped altogether.
Yeah.
You know, and Yakov said that everything gets political at this level, and then immediately after, you know, the screen is closed and the stage is closed, it turns technical. Well, to the extent, you know, because in this realm of politics and power games, nothing is really technical. Actually, everything is political. I could even argue that this is kind of technical. Performance bound, you know? But what comes next is political. So it's political about fishing quotas, about borders, about Schengen, about border controls, about just anything. And it's the spheres of influence and the Game of Thrones, if you will. Now, it need not to be bloody or bloody at all, as the real Hollywood produced Game of Thrones. But in a nutshell, that's what it's all about. Look, we joined the EU 10 years ago. Huh? One of these days is going to be that glorious revolution anniversary, Jacob II. And what we got for ourselves? We got some growth, good. But you know, every time, you know, there's always an ebb and flow. And as long as you need programs like the recovery program, recovery and development program, the one that ensued after the first wave of the COVID crisis, there is something wrong with that. What kind of recovery? I mean, as if we were having a second World War time and again. All the time it's recovery for something. From financial crisis, now from the COVID crisis, because the GDPs dropped sharply, but then recovered in a year. The more country industrialized, meaning more country producing stuff, the drop was less severe. So Serbia had none for that matter. As a Serb woman, I assume, if it's not an affront these days to label somebody by ethnicity, or then at least by the affiliation to the state, you should be proud. But should you? Should you? Because what's there in it, in the pecking order for Serbia? Are we talking big margins, moderate margins, or small margins? I hope you see what I'm at. So Croatia has been growing, you know, but it's mediocre, it's anemic, mediocratic growth. And with such a rate, we will never ever be able to catch up with Austria and Netherlands, and I'm not interested in Poland because we've been at that level for 50 years. And that's the game of competition. Everything is competitive and positional. So why the hell then you would measure the GDP levels and growth in the first place? Because you're positioning yourself in the society of humans, in the society of human subgroups and groups. That's what you do. So Croatian growth was as low as Serbia's growth, or Serbia's growth. Absent the EU membership, didn't suffer. It was the same as Croatian, and actually Bosnian growth, often labeled as a dysfunctional country, was even higher than Croatian. But from their baseline, assuming that the growth rate perpetuates, that it's stable, they will never catch up. And we will never catch up. So what we got ourselves in the first 10 years? EU funds. It's great. I'll be done. It's great stuff. And how much further are we supposed to be able to avail ourselves of? Not long, because soon we're going to reach the average of 75% of the EU average per capita. And by purchasing power parity, of course, don't be confused. Not in nominal prices, but in purchasing power parity. And how we managed, you know, to grow with the same factors of production, and those are land, people, capital, and knowledge these days. How the hell we managed to go that high? Because per capita is per one. You do very easy subtraction, because people leave. And with the same factors of production, you make the same. And it makes you richer on the paper. So it's a food for thought. Be skeptical.
Thank you, President Milanovic, for stressing the importance of convergence in the EU, which unfortunately today only comes with full membership, which is still some years away for us. And one part of the proposal which the gentleman who asked the question referred to, the staged accession proposal, indeed suggests that support to convergence should come much earlier, already in the pre-accession stages. President Pendarovski, would you like to maybe address the comment related to the Open Balkan Initiative, and also President Begaj, perhaps briefly, the question on the Open Balkan Initiative?
Yeah, of course, very briefly.
Very briefly.
No, when I heard that he's coming from Bulgaria, I said no again about the constitutional changes, please. So that was not the question, okay? So you're asking in essence about the pros and cons of the Open Balkan Initiative. And I would like to leave you unsatisfied, but Macedonian and wider regional public knows quite well my stance on that initiative. If I can sum up in one or two sentences my position, then I have been praising that initiative since that initiative was launched 4 years ago in Novi Sad by these three guys, known guys from our region, and our former Prime Minister. And I always speaking about the structural shortages of that initiative because he is only embracing 3 out of 6 Western Balkan countries, which is a big problem. And a certain level of duplicity between the Open Balkan and Berlin process. I can just reiterate very shortly what has been the conclusions of the Berlin process from November last year, and I can tell you that in 2-3 important decisions they have taken on that occasion, it has been absolutely the same or more or less very similar to what the 3 Open Balkan member countries have been deciding a month or so earlier. So we do not need duplicity of the very scarce resources at our disposal, be it from the region, emerging autonomously from the region or coming to us from wider European community. So in my view, Open Balkan should try to embrace all 6 Western Balkan countries, but on that moment, everybody will ask, what about the Berlin process? At the moment, my position as a president of this country is that Berlin process should be assumed, should be accepted as an umbrella initiative for the region and Western Balkan to be only a part of that global initiatives and undertakings regarding that link between the European Union and the Western Balkans. But in my view, we would like to duplicate the work of our moderator. She's doing a great job, but I think it's much more interesting to see the stance of the new Montenegrin president on that, because up to date, they have a very interesting stance on that, and up to now, they have not been the member of that initiative. I think something is moving in this direction, but it's better for him to explain than me.
Thank you, President Pendarovski. President Begaj, a short answer from you.
Yes, we 6 Western Balkan countries want to be joined the EU. So instead of going long way, waiting long way to go to EU, we have to communicate and to cooperate with ourselves. And I believe that Open Balkans, if that is as it is, economical cooperation and inclusive for 6 nations, and bring prosperity for all the nations of the region, I think it's a good initiative. But Berlin process is an umbrella that is dealing with political cooperation. So
thank you, President Begaj. President Milatovic, it would be very interesting indeed to hear your opinion and your answer to the question on the Open Balkan Initiative. How is in which direction the Montenegrin position evolving?
I mean, as an economist, I'm in favor of the Balkan region which is open for trade of goods, of services, of people. So whether that, is something that can be achieved through an open Balkans or through a Berlin process or to whatever process, I think, it's a good thing. I think, more recently, the topic has been very politicized in Montenegro because it was presented in a very, perhaps, wrong way as a sort of a Serbian world or Albanian world or whatever kind of world. But if we basically, zoom out a bit and if we, sort of only tackle the topic through the economic eyes, I do believe that, if the initiative is bringing the value to the people and to the economy, I think, then from that regard, it is a positive one.
Thank you very much, President Milatovic. To close this panel, I have to say...
Can I say a word?
You're setting the tone.
If it's a word.
No. It is a word. It is a word, but this is not a microphone. Does it work?
It's working. I think it's working.
Oh, Radi, okay. So once, You know what will convince me that the EU is not. What's going to convince me that EU means business? First time we engulf or accept in our club the country that is not predominantly or inherently Christian, and that is Albania. Of course, it should not put Albania on that account in favor of any other Christian entity, because everything here is quite identitarian. And on personal account, look, I'm coming from the predominantly Catholic country. Catholicism is not just a Sunday church in Croatia, it's a faith, it's a kind of destiny manifest, which is not always the best thing, but it is. And I'm self-labeled, people know. I'm not atheist, I'm not agnostic, because it means nothing, but Catholic I'm not. And I'm not churchgoer, I don't participate in Mass. But this is predominantly 65% on the paper Muslim country, and that's the problem. Big time. Let's cut the four-letter word, huh? That's the reason. And the challenge should not be lower, because actually they are, if you will, very secular country. And whenever I come across Albanian, I'm puzzled to the point that I stop thinking about that. What is the origin of the person? For instance, Edi Rama is just about everything. A Muslim, a Catholic, an Orthodox, Greek, or Albanian. I don't know who you are, but I've been knowing you for months now. Actually, I don't know but it resonates up there. So let's not fool ourselves. Let's not continue deluding ourselves. This is about identity. And once this is resolved, this could be a whole new world. Sorry, thank you for this time. Huh?
Thank you. Since we are already past the time for finalizing this panel, I would just like to say that I'm happy that, we started from war, then we discussed democracy, prosperity, and in the end we discussed EU accession and regional cooperation. President Milanovic, with this last comment, perhaps a little bit changed the ending of the panel, but still I will stick to the fact that we have ended up speaking and discussing regional cooperation, and I think that really regional cooperation is what is going to take us to durable prosperity and peace and democracy in our region. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for your very interesting comments, and I wish you all a great day and a great rest of the conference. Thank you.